For many people, the biggest shock on budget night this week were the forecasts about when Australia's borders are likely to open again. According to the budget, Australia is basically going to remain in lockdown or locked up until mid-2022, well over a year away. The aviation, international tourism and education sectors are despairing. So are the more than 30,000 Australians who are still stranded overseas. Remember the ones that we were promised were going to be home by Christmas last year? So are the many internationals who live here in Australia who cannot return to their home countries to visit family and loved ones. Closed international borders are costing Australia billions of dollars every month. New South Wales, it's costing alone $1.5 billion per month. And with other parts of the world opening up again, people and businesses are going elsewhere, in some cases permanently. Now, of course, there are important health considerations here. With the virus far from contained in many nations and our own national vaccine program so far behind, the health risks of opening our borders cannot be ignored. But there is also a political imperative here. After watching the political rewards heaped on the premiers with their closed borders policy, the Morrison government has decided to err on the side of extreme caution. Now, cautious and conservative is fine when it comes to tackling the pandemic. But what is not fine is that the government has bungled both effective quarantine and vaccinations. And what is even worse is that the government does not have a plan to fix the situation and allow Australia to safely, step by step, open our borders again. Our economic recovery is dependent on getting this right. Creating Fortress Australia, turning us into a hermit kingdom, is not the answer. That is why it was so disappointing that there was no mention in this week's budget about business or university-sponsored travel and quarantine. The universities and businesses are willing to fund new quarantine places to allow international students and others to return. There was no mention of new rapid testing processes or truncated quarantine periods, which could be achieved with proper investment. There was no mention of expanded and new quarantine facilities, something Blind Freddy could see that every state in Australia should have by now. Major new quarantine facilities, not just hotels. Anthony Albanese suggested the Bladden Village outside of Darwin as an option. It could house up to 1,000 people and is currently being used to quarantine US defence personnel. Good idea. Do it. Get on with it. Australia needs a roadmap to reopening to the rest of the world. All options need to be on the table. Instead, all we got this week was a Prime Minister, a Treasurer and a Health Minister who could not even agree on when Australians will be vaccinated. It's just not good enough, Rita.
Well, I agree with about 75% of what you said, but the responsibility of the premiers here cannot be understated. We do have a national cabinet. We've seen the power the states hold and the responsibility they hold. Yes, we do need a clear roadmap, but I think what we saw at the budget was an election budget. So perhaps if we do go to an election come November or December, then we can get some clear ideas of reopening the country, because that comes with considerable political risk, as you know, because this Fortress Australia idea, this hermit Australia, as you called it, it's actually very popular. A lot of people are happy for our borders to remain closed indefinitely. Yeah, if they don't have family to visit overseas, if they don't have business to attend to overseas, they like the idea of the borders closed. They like the idea of the fact that our migration has dropped to zero. We've had around 200,000 people migrating to Australia every year, and we know that's not popular. Most people want that number to plummet, and this has artificially created that. So there's a lot of reasons why Fortress Australia is popular, but I agree with you that it's not sustainable because we need the economic activity, if nothing else.
The politics here is so obvious, isn't it? You know, for a decade, we know that Aussies love strong borders, and for a decade or more, federal coalition governments won elections off the back of them. I think you've had Scott Morrison there looking at the state premiers, Labor premiers in some instances, becoming very politically popular off the back of their strong borders. And now it seems that the federal government has flicked the switch to Fortress Australia and making, and this is the thing, no plans, like at least give us a roadmap to when the country will be able to open up again. And the one that really gets me is building national quarantine facilities. Every state should have regional national quarantine facilities, like we've done for over a century or more.
I disagree with that, because we've got this situation now where the left wants to talk down hotel quarantine when it has been, with the exception of Victoria, and we know well what the problems are there, it has been remarkably successful. We've taken more than 200,000 people through hotel quarantine. The 99.99% of them safely. Yes, there's been a couple of leaks, but they've been the exception. Most people, with the exception of Victoria, again, I grant you, have gone through hotel quarantine with minimal issues, and some of the problems are easily resolved. I don't know why the states insist on certain properties with poor ventilation to be their hotel quarantine facility when there are plenty of other options in the city that you don't need to build regional centres. But though I understand going forward that could be something we need to look at.